Okay, and welcome everybody to our July N3C Community Forum. Um, Next slide, please. Oh, Destiny, could you advance the slide? Oh, okay.
It's not showing. It might be a
it
little
is showing
delayed.
now.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit delayed, but that's okay. Just wanted to remind everybody that these are all recorded and they're the Data to Health YouTube channel, so you can check out the seminar if you missed it or if you want to rewatch it. And just to please use the Q&A button to post any questions that you have. We'll be monitoring periodically, and you can also raise your hand if you would like to unmute and use your microphone. Next slide, please. And we will be on break next month. So enjoy your August, and we'll be starting again in September. Next slide. A little bit of an update on the N3C Data Enclave. We are at 84 sites with 22.8 million people in our database and 8.9 million COVID cases. Lots of data in there and lots of good research going on. Next slide, please. And in September, on the 9th, we'll have a presentation on the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, or TEFCA, by Catherine Bingham. Next slide, please. And it's our great pleasure to have Dr. Alex Cheng with us today, coming from Vanderbilt University, from the Department of Biomedical Informatics there. And he's going to be talking about the Vulcan HL7 FHIR Accelerator. As we all know, interoperability is a huge challenge in terms of healthcare exchange, and then also for research, especially with real world data and electronic health records. So he's going to be sharing work from the FHIR implementation guide that the real world data working group has been working on. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Cheng.
Great, thank you. Go ahead and share my screen. Are you all seeing the presentation mode or the slides?
I see the presentation mode.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, good to see everyone and to be able to present on this topic. I think it's really timely because the September presentation is going to be on TEFCA, which is also FHIR related and about interoperability and exchange. So it'll be a nice transition for an introduction to a lot of what you'll hear at the TEFCA presentation as well. But for this particular presentation, I'm going to be presenting not in my role as someone who works at Vanderbilt on the REDCap integration, although I will talk a little bit about that towards the end of the presentation, but primarily to talk about my role as the co-lead for the real-world data working group for the Vulcan FHIR Accelerator. So I think a lot of you may be familiar with the idea of FHIR and about the accelerators in particular. So the Vulcan FHIR Accelerator is looking at applications of FHIR for clinical research. And so why FHIR for clinical research? I think this audience probably is very familiar with the benefits potentially of being able to get real world data and FHIR data from the EHR and other systems for clinical research. FHIR is an enabling technology that allows for the interoperability and harmonization and processing of data. Vulcan specifically exists to help clinical and translational research start using more FHIR. And so we'll talk again more about the specifics of that in the implementation guide that we've created through this working group. And then also from an implementation point, from a technological standpoint, what we've done at Vanderbilt with using the clinical data interoperability services to be able to transfer data back and forth between the EHR and electronic data capture system like REDCap. And so the idea is to be able to use FHIR for processing and collecting a large amount of data. And then we also bring together clinical care and translational research, trying to bridge the gap between the two systems. And so Vulcan specifically seeks, and FHIR accelerators in general, seek to create a community of implementers and users and standards development organizations to be able to get everyone to the same table to be able to support projects that have a clear and practical objective, and to do so on a short time scale. So hence the idea of the name of the accelerator. We create implementation guides, which I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the real world data implementation guide for Vulcan in this presentation. They host connectathons as well, provide events and education regarding FHIR and the use of FHIR for clinical research. And for Vulcan in particular, we've attracted over 40 members from a wide range of organizations, which I'll display on the next slide. We're also supported by a project management office, and it's not just a US project, it's actually international in scope. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is specific to the US applications of FHIR, but the intent for Vulcan and HL7 and FHIR in general is to be an international standard. So these are the member organizations of Vulcan currently. It spans academia, different research consortia, government organizations, implementers. So a lot of the software vendors that you might recognize are here as well. Pharma, so don't bring the sponsor's point of view, standards development organizations like CDISC. So that's another aspect of it is we're interested not just in the collection of the data, but potentially how it could be used for regulatory submissions in the future, and then other standards organizations that are part of that as well. So within Vulcan, we also have project groups. These are all led by working group leads, as you can see here on the right-hand side. And some of these working groups include schedule activities. So that's using the clinical, the digital protocol standards that have been put in place to see if those can be communicated over FHIR. The real world data working group, which I lead with Scott Gordon from the FDA. The phenomics exchange for research and diagnostics. That's again trying to get phenomic data into FHIR and being able to have that be interoperable between systems. The electronic product information working group, adverse events, which we work very closely with regards to real world data as well. FHIR to OMOP, I know, is one that is probably of particular interest to N3C. And many of you who are on this call may actually want to consider joining that working group. This one is a little bit unique because it's a joint working group between Vulcan and Odyssey. So you don't need to be a member of Vulcan to participate in this working group. If you reach out to Devira, she'll be able to add you to the working group list for that, and you can participate in all the work they're doing there to be able to support the FHIR to OMOP. Again, also very real world data related, but much more specific to the OMOP standard and its interoperability with FHIR. And then the last one I've added here is the sample data project. Catherine Craven, who was supposed to be presenting with me today, but since her regrets, she is leading a sample data project with Rustlib, which is seeking to develop a FHIR database that mimics EHR data for testing smart applications for clinical research. So there are many situations where we need this realistic EHR data that we don't really have good systems for currently. And so the goal is to be able to create some sort of database that smart application developers can use to be able to test their research informatics tools against a realistic FHIR data. So again, another potential use case for N3C data that we see here, but happy to answer any questions or to brainstorm about ways that N3C data could potentially be used for testing any of the implementation guides that these working groups have developed. So again, I think this is a fairly well-known point in a working group that is focused on real-world data and N3C, but just so we cover our bases here, there's lots of problems with using real-world data from a healthcare system such as an EHR for research, right? And so when we have to use these systems for chart review or just from EHR data pools, there's lots of gaps that have to be bridged in order for that data to be useful for pharmaceutical research or regulatory for that pharmaceutical research. Some of those gaps being different semantic meanings by what a medication means in the EHR versus what it means when it's part of a protocol, different syntax, different terminologies that are used by different research fields, think MedDRA versus RxNorm. different business practices, and then different default granularity and completeness in terms of the data that are being collected. So the gaps here, another way to think of this, and particularly as an example, is to ask the question, when did a participant take a medication? So that would sound like a pretty straightforward question, right? Like you wouldn't expect that to be particularly complicated, but in the EHR context for the healthcare domain, these are based on encounter records. So you would think that would come from a prescription. You would figure that out from an order, a dispensing record, an administration record, or a caregiver patient assertion, right? So there's lots of different ways to be able to get at that answer, get at that question in the real world context. Versus in a research context, that is all protocolized, right? So all the context of how medication was taken, where it was taken, who had administered it, would be defined by the protocol. It would be very specific in the electronic data capture system. And so there's in our past experience, there have been ways that we try to get around this. So currently, the FHIR resource that we use primarily from the EHR to get at the idea of medication administration, when did a patient take a medication, is using the medication request FHIR resource. So this is a FHIR resource that's required by the US CDI core. US CDI core is basically the FHIR profile, the set of resources and data elements that are required by the US government for all EHR vendors to be able to comply by. And so medication resource is one of those, but that oftentimes doesn't get you exactly the information you need about when exactly a patient took the medication. That's just when it was ordered or when it was prescribed. A little bit better would be the medication administration resource, but I put that over here as a bigger boat, but it's farther behind because it's not required by US CDI core quite yet. And also, even within the US, even within the resource, there are certain elements of context that may not be fully captured by the EHR implementation of that FHIR resource to make it useful for clinical research. And so instead of a boat, what we really need here is a bridge. And so that's what the FHIR, the Vulcan real-world data FHIR implementation guide is seeking to do. And I'll have a link to that a little bit later in the presentation. But essentially, when you go there, for anyone who has looked at the FHIR standards before, this table will be familiar to you. And for the implementation guide that we've put together, there is you can view the profile for the different resources in this differential table that shows you how it differs from the core set of values that are specified by the IPA. So again, with the goal, and it's definitely not perfect by any means, that's part of why we want to be able to do the pilot study, is to see what kind of gaps still exist in the implementation guide. But if we start to get to the point where what is entered in the EHR can have sufficient context for us to know how it could potentially be used for clinical research.
Alex, can I ask you a question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. First, thank you. This is near and dear to my heart. So I know Devera has been working on the implementation guide with the team for a while, and we've been having regular meetings, we NCATS and NCI and FDA, about the delta between the implementation guide and actually what I think you're talking about, testing it. And so I want to make sure that the community is aware that we have this grant from ASPE called Code Map Services, where we are implementing FHIR to OMA into the CADSR in CI, and then it's a semantic hub, so you should be able to go from FHIR to Sentinel, FHIR to OMA, FHIR to CDISC, and they're the HIEs, Indiana, IHI, and Nebraska, Iowa, called Sync Health, are giving us data. This is the second round of testing this. We started testing during COVID of 2021, 22. And then this is also being pulled in now, and will, and so because the delta between the implementation guide and, like you're saying, and actually doing it it's a big jump, right? because I think everybody knows that, you know, one FHIR implementation at University of XYZ is really quite different from another institution. And so in N3C or other places, we want to have those mappings, but I still think there's going to be a need for harmonization and adjudication, even of the FHIR files. And then the other question I just make sure that you're aware of that project. It's an ongoing project. And then the other thing that that it would be good to talk about is also, you know, going from FHIR to CDISC, because FDA doesn't really accept. Someday they may accept a FHIR file, but right now they don't. And so, you know, part of the mapping is keeping this going, you know, we working with CDISC and FDA on make sure it's a double hop if you need to. So I think this is really wonderful. And the other question I have for you, I'm sorry, is one of the things we know the EHR data is horrible, the most generous word I could describe it as. But, you know, in N3C, we link CMS data and other data, SEER data now and SRTR data and mortality data, because we never really imagined that any one real-world data source was good enough. So, you know, I think that it's a bit of a falsehood to say, well, EHR data isn't, it's a piece of the puzzle, right? CMS data doesn't have lab results, but they have every visit. So anyway, I just thought, you know, maybe you could address the question of, does linkage address some of the gaps that you're identifying? And then how do we get the FHIR implementations to be more harmonized and less cleaning, because there's still a lot to be done there too. Sorry to interrupt.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually glad that you brought that up. And I think there was a previous, when I was doing my background for preparing for this, there was another, I think, forum presentation that talked about code map as well. So I definitely would encourage people to go back and take a look at that one as well. But I think this would be a good discussion to see whether or not the FHIR implementation guide that the real world data group has come up with could be tested as part of that project that you were describing earlier. And then it's pretty bare bones at the current members of the state. And so if there's something that, you know, that we could attach to or to embed ourselves into, I think that would kind of give us the best of both worlds in terms of making the effort as worthwhile as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And FYI, we are also working with 3 vendors because the code maps are at NCI. So the idea is you pull them in and as an ETL vendor, and you should be able to use them. You don't need to go through N3C. This is or should be a resource. But no, we would love to have you. You know, it's a long road to get this working, and then we also want to stay tightly aligned not only with Vulcan but also with ONC, because, you know, their work with the QHINs and TEFCA and I think they don't perfectly overlap with what we're trying to do with research, but we need to be collaborators with them because I think they're just so important. So
right, absolutely, totally agree. And then this might be a good opportunity for us to be able to bridge, like we're trying to straddle sort of the academic research side with a lot of the pharma partners that work through with Vulcan as well. So if there's a way for us to be able to make that crosstalk happen, I think that would be benefit to all parties. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions? I saw there was something in the chat. Oh yes, yeah, more information about code map. So yeah, thanks for posting that one, Ken. All right, let me continue on here. Yeah, so sort of as we alluded to earlier, the framework here that we're talking about is EHR as a source, potentially other data sources as well. There are other Vulcan accelerators that are working on payer data. So CMS is a big player in that in terms of helping us to figure out what are the relevant data elements for payer data that could potentially be worked into research as well as we think about linking, as Ken mentioned, CMS data and EHR data as well into one unified data resource. And so when it's pulled from these sources, then it's made available for linkages, research analysis, and then the eventual goal, talking about CDISC again, how do we repurpose all of that FHIR data into a package that meets the regulatory requirements. This is where it's helpful to have someone from the FDA on our working group as well. And then thinking about how that can then be submitted, not just at the FDA, but PMDA in Japan, EMA in Europe, all these international organizations. How can we get them all to work together using the same standard of data from the source? So right now the focus is more on the EHR data pull side, and so pulling off from the EHR, proposing syntax field to standardize retrieval, and then to ensure that all needed data is retrieved. And then in terms of the scope of what we're doing here, we have two elements of the implementation guide. One of them is a couple of suggested queries for the cohort determination aspects. So eligibility criteria for patients that are in the EHR to be able to determine the set of patients in the cohort. Those FHIR IDs go over to the next stage, which is patient data retrieval, and that's more of a traditional data pull that you would expect from the EHR and have probably done yourselves many times. And then that data out of scope, of course, could then go to a data warehouse at a data coordinating center or a regulatory agency or some sort of data aggregation firm. In terms of the conceptual framework, again, our base for the real-world data implementation guide is the International Practice Access implementation guide. So that you can think of that as, from a research standpoint, overall, and I think developed both for the research organizations in Europe, the US, and in Asia as well. And then focusing that on the implementation guide that I'm talking about here, which is the real-world data FHIR implementation guide from Vulcan. And then also with the potential for more specific extensions for regional cores. So regional being countries or other specific regions that may have other specifications and requirements, and then also clinical domains as well. So there's another FHIR accelerator called Codex that's working on M-code, which is a standard code for minimum set of clinical oncology data elements, and others as well that all play into that. So the idea is to be kind of flexible and to be able to apply to as many different contexts as possible. So we currently do have a couple of use cases also on the implementation guide website. We have one COVID-19 one, which is the vaccine effectiveness study. So you can see here very simply taking an example of an actual clinical trial from clinicaltrials.gov. How taking the inclusion criteria, turning that into a FHIR query, and then excluding potential participants from that list as needed. And then also a set of data that need to be retrieved. We didn't give precise queries for that because we figured most people actually understand how to create an API call to an EHR to be able to pull data elements that are required. So again, this is sort of what Ken and I were discussing just now. We are now that the implementation guide has been published, we are looking to collaborate for somebody to be able to provide a use case that requires real-world data collection from EHRs to be able to test this, to pilot test this newly published FHIR implementation guide. And so the steps of this are to determine a gap analysis in terms of what are the needs of the study and what is currently published in the implementation guide, to be able to test an actual technical implementation of the query for cohort selection and for pulling data, to be able to replicate that at multiple sites, and then also to, once we've gone through these steps, to recommend changes and revisions to the implementation guide, and estimating also what are the estimated cost and benefits to implementing that implementation guide, and for implementing in general FHIR data pulls for clinical research at a specific site. And the idea is just for this to be iterative so that we continue to refine the implementation guide going forward. So we've done a little bit of the very high level analysis of comparing the implementation guide that we published with the US core. And so you can see here, this is basically the number of data elements that are required in the IG that are more than just what is required currently in the US core profile. And so again, there's definitely some gaps. You can see here real world data, the medication administration resources not even required at core currently, and we do suggest that be added going forward to the US core. In terms of the scope of work, and so as I mentioned before, the pilot sites will determine gaps between the FHIR data elements of the IG and the actual FHIR that's available on sites. Maybe we should modify this also to say like the formatting and the metadata that are also required to make sure that everything that is required for an actual clinical study are available in the data. Sorry. To propose methods to update the EHR data to align with the IG. And then to execute at least 2 sites, comparing the data queries, the ability to collate the results for the data as is, and then also for a data set that aligns to the real world data IG. And then thinking about scalability and adoption assessment to be able to propose options for updating the entire healthcare system's EHR to be able to include the FHIR resources that are required in the IG, and also estimating the level of effort to be able to implement. So the sponsors are all very interested in this because they want to be able to see the cost benefit of, well, if how much do I have to invest in creating the data pipelines in order to make it worthwhile for the organizations in terms of decreased effort for the people who are entering in the data at the sites. So any questions on the implementation guide? I say it's a little bit towards the end to talk about what we've done specifically with REDCap and pulling real world data using FHIR, but I just wanted to see if there are any questions. See, there's 3 questions in the Q&A. The link, yes, I can enter that. I think it was earlier on one of the slides, but I can definitely send that, put that in the chat in a little bit. Yeah.
Alex, would that be helpful if I read them out loud so others who cannot see the chat know what the question is about?
Yes, sorry. So I can do that since I'm looking at it right now.
Okay.
So is there a link to the implementation guide? Yes, it was on a couple of slides previous, but I'll see if I can add that. It's right here. So build.phir.org/IG HL7. But I'll try to see if I can throw that into the chat maybe later on. And then Harold wanted to know, does research design play a role? Absolutely, yeah. So this is another area where the different working groups could potentially learn from each other. So there's a group that's basically creating templates for the digital protocols in FHIR. And so if we're able to use that FHIR resource, those FHIR resources to understand the schedule of activities in a clinical trial, those can then be translated over into data pull requirements as well. So, oh, sorry, that was a working group that was part. It was way in the beginning. It was basically one of the, so the schedule of activities working group is working on sort of the digital protocol. And so those are where the real world data specifications would be outlined for clinical research. And many of the people who are on the leads and the members of that working group are also involved in the real world data as well.
Alex, can you stay there for 1 sec? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Thanks. That was really great so far. So I'm Melissa. I co-lead the Phenomics Exchange one with Anita and Shaham in our group, and also the N3C. I'm just curious about, so one of the things we've talked about in the Vulcan group is just some of the intersections. And I think your project here is really like very integrative because it can really, like you just explained with the schedule of activities. And I think just trying to sort of triangulate and brainstorm a little bit here about the relationship between the real world data IG that you have, the phenomics exchange one, and the N3C. We do a lot of computable phenotyping in the N3C. And a lot of those computable phenotypes are used for different things, but could be used to identify a cohort for a specific research application, could be used to classify and stratify patients for different outcomes research and these kinds of things. The Phenomics Exchange project really aims to extract phenotypic data out of the EHR for use in diagnostic contexts. And because we basically struggle that in the way that information is sprinkled throughout the EHR. And so it's really meant as kind of a wrapper. In the N3C, we've actually done some similar things, transforming OMOP data into that same kind of phenotypic representation that would allow you to kind of do more genetic and rare disease kinds of activities. And I would love to develop a use case that leverages all three together, the Phenomics Exchange, the N3C, where we have a very large number of rare disease patients or rare events or other kinds of rare things, but enough of a population to do that as a use case for your IG and how we might do that. And then the N3C can be sort of a staging opportunity, and then we could try to do it outside of the context of N3C for care purposes as opposed to research purposes. I don't know what you think about that.
That would make a lot of sense. And I think any opportunities we have to be able to combine forces with other working groups, I think would be beneficial to be able to increase the sort of the visibility of both of the implementation guides. And so sorry for excluding your name off this list. I must have an old list of the leads.
Oh, no, it's fine. That Anita and Cheng are both on my team, so it's fine.
Any other questions about the implementation guide or the Vulcan efforts? If not, I could continue to talk about a little bit. So I'd like to include a little information about what we've done with REDCap and FHIR, just because I think it's relevant for a lot of these large data consortiums. And particularly, one thing that I'm passionate about is getting these EHR extraction type of studies into the hands of community hospitals that may not have a large data curation team that a lot of us large academic medical centers have. But also to kind of think about other use cases potentially where we've used real world data in a research project with FHIR to be able to be an exemplar use case for future studies going forward. So I think most of the people on this call are probably familiar with REDCap, but it's a electronic data capture system that's available at no cost to nonprofit, government, and academic institutions. It's highly customizable, very easy to set up. It's very researcher driven, currently in use in over 7,300 institutions around the country, around the world, in 157 countries. So it's really become sort of a de facto standard in a lot of senses for electronic data capture software at a lot of academic institutions, although there are other options that do exist as well. But basically, what makes REDCap somewhat unique is that it's very user driven. So there's much like a Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. The user or the researcher is responsible for building the REDCap project, and so we've put a lot of effort into. Yeah, thanks, Melissa, for putting in the Phenomics Exchange information. I think that'll be good for the group to be able to design their own studies, and we've really made it such that the data coming from the EHR and being able to integrate that data into REDCap is also meant to be researcher driven, such that it doesn't require a large health IT effort in order to get that data over. There's also lots of options for being able to export that data in a way that's compliant with different de-identification or regulatory requirements. And so the reason why I bring this up for this FHIR talk is because one of the most requested features since the beginning of REDCap has been, can I get data from the EHR automatically into REDCap? And so the problem that everyone's trying to solve is trying to avoid having to like enter in data from one electronic system into another electronic system, either transcribing or cutting and pasting, or this one that you may be familiar with, right? The getting data from a data warehouse, which is only updated every 24 to 48 hours, doing a SQL query from that, downloading it as a file, and then uploading it to either a system that aggregates all the data or into a REDCap project. And so what we've sought to do through REDCap Clinical Data Interoperability Services, which is a module that is built into REDCap. So if any institution has REDCap, they already have CDIS built into it, is to be able to allow for that direct data transfer from the EHR into REDCap. And so currently we have it being used at 67 Epic institutions and 11 Cerner institutions. But again, all of this is meant to highlight that it's meant to take an interface that's already available, required by law through the 21st Century Cures Act, ONC final rule, and to make that data available to your researchers through CDIS. And then also to democratize access to these type of EHR data pools that go beyond just the academic medical centers, even though currently a lot of, as you can see from this list, a lot of the current users are large academic medical centers, but we're looking to be able to expand that beyond. So currently, Clinical Data Interoperability Services has two different modes. One of them, which is more geared towards prospective studies for e-sourcing data, so getting data from the EHR into specific case report form fields. And so this is a very simple project that we use for screening to calculate PF ratio for patients on an ongoing basis to determine whether or not they qualify for a clinical study. And so here's an example of how you could map that data using a Loin code that's available in the EHR and mapping that to a REDCap field and have that updating automatically in the background with REDCap. And so a lot of times we get the question of, well, why, if I already have OLAP at my institution or already have Coronet or I have a team that queries from Clarity, why would I need to implement another system that pulls data from REDCap, from the EHR into REDCap? And so really the application for a clinical data pool is meant to be in a situation where you have to have some sort of semi-real-time pull of data from the EHR into an external system like REDCap. So that, as opposed to having to wait every 24, 48 hours for your research database to sync up with the new data that comes across from the EHR, you're able to be able to query that continuously from an external system like REDCap. So it really just depends on the application to where these are most applicable. The one study that we were able to demonstrate the usefulness of this is through the Nectar trials. So you may be familiar with this as a therapeutic trial for inpatients that were infected with COVID-19, and so the burden on on coordinators to enter data, especially for these daily labs and vital forms over 28 days during their admission, is the bulk of the data entry burden for those coordinators. And so we wanted to see, hypothetically speaking, if we were to get that data automatically from the EHR, how much potential time could be saved for the coordinators, and then also to take a look at whether or not that data is actually accurate or not. So being able to see, like that's another one of the questions that we constantly get is, well, how do we know that the data are reliable when they come over from the EHR and not adjudicated by a person looking at all the data? And so this study meant to look at that as well. But first, looking at sort of the coverage of the data, we found that the vast majority, 84% of data that was entered by the coordinator was also able to be entered automatically through an EHR poll using FHIR. So if this is for results for 40 patients, and we were able to potentially save about an hour per patient for entering in data for each of these fields that you see here, or each of these forms that you see here. But perhaps more interesting is the accuracy of the data that was entered in. So among the 2,659 fields that had data both from a coordinator and with this automated data pull from the EHR, the vast majority were exact matches. But in the situations where they weren't exactly matched, the vast majority of those were actually deemed to be coordinator errors. So when we went through it again with an analyst and a coordinator, there was agreement between those two that in most of the cases, there was actually an error on the coordinator's part for entering in that data. And then for a very small number of cases, there were situations where the mapping for the coordinator source was not available through FHIR, or there was inconsistent data availability in FHIR, which caused there to be, in less than 1% of the cases, some sort of discrepancy that was not the coordinator's fault. It was the EHR data's fault. So all of this is talking about CDP. The other use case for CDIS is a clinical data mart. And so this, again, is a way to be able to get longitudinal data directly from the EHR and also pulled on a nightly basis. You actually can set it up to do it more often than that, but in most cases, we'd be able to, every 24 hours is frequent enough for the use cases that we've had so far. And the way that data are represented in this format is that each medication or each data point are represented as a repeating instance of a form. So this can get fairly cumbersome in REDCap fairly quickly. So we definitely don't encourage this to be able to extract the entire EHR into REDCap. But for certain limited situations, we're able to get basically data from all of these resources. You can think of each of these columns as a table and each of the repeating instances as a row in that table for patients that are enrolled in the study. Those are able to be identified through the tomography form in the medical record number field. Some of the new data elements that we've added recently are like the insurance coverage, devices, scheduled surgeries, genomics are included now through the US core as well. So a lot of interesting information and things that we're constantly learning more about in terms of their applicability for clinical trials. And one trial that we've done with this was led through UC Denver. This was an oxygen titration trial for critically admitted patients. And for 3 of those sites, we were able to use the FHIR interface with the EHR. The other ones that did traditional chart review, we were able to aggregate all of that data to a REDCap project at the UMC, which was where the data coordinating was housed. And for that particular project, we used the patient resource, the observation resources for labs and vitals, and the condition resource for their problem list. For that particular study, we had over 12,000 patients, and we're able to collect 1.7 oxygenation values, so which is the primary outcome for that project. So again, these are all presenting these are sort of give you ideas of other use cases for FHIR and for real world data, and hopefully illustrate well the ways that that we've practically been able to implement FHIR for clinical research. Sort of the model that we're testing here is potentially using REDCap, again, a system that is widely available even to lower resourced hospitals and organizations, to have them being in control of their data and to be able to coordinate that data through the API, have that data pulled to a data coordinating center through the REDCap API, and have that to be also de-identified en route to the data coordinating center. So again, each of the local institutions still has control over their own data, but it can be aggregated and de-identified at a data coordinating center. And each of these steps can also be automated so that a person's not having to go and process all of the data at each phase of that transmission. So talking back to implications for N3C, I think a couple of the current calls to action is we would love to have another COVID-19 use case for the FHIR implementation guide, just to flesh out more of the examples of example queries, both for cohort building. Sounds like we have also opportunities to be able to collaborate with other efforts that are going on with NCI in terms of being able to see if multiple implementation guides could be tested here. Also to participate, if you aren't already in the FHIR to OMOP working group with Odyssey. Other potential implications and ways to get involved or to see if we can use N3C as a use case for the sample data project, as a use case for the real world data pilot study. We do have plans also to do like a small RFP for any sites that are interested in participating in any of these use cases. So stay tuned for that. We might have a follow-up presentation to be able to present those, but I think those will be all good ways to be able to get involved. And then finally, to consider thinking about CDIS pipelines for community hospitals and clinics in terms of if that would be of interest in ways to be able to engage more organizations that way. So special thanks to all the people who have we've collaborated with for both for CDIS implementation and as displayed here for Vulcan. And I'm happy to answer any questions. So my contact information is here. I'll be able to add that into the chat as well. And then you can also learn more from the link for the real world data implementation guide and the project page for Vulcan here as well.
Alex, thank you so much. A question, you were talking about pulling data and when you were adjudicating between different values in the what REDCap pulled out. And the question is in, commercially available clinical trial management systems, one of the things the FDA looks for in 21 Part 11 is a full provenance of that data, because for folks on the call, we know that between 1% and 2% of their data entry errors in CRFs versus source, and so that the cost is very expensive. I won't go into the details, but somebody from the drug company comes and says which is true, then you investigate it, yada yada, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really a high cost to fix those errors. So my question for you is, when you're doing this with REDCap, that detail of the provenance of the EHR, using that as a single source, how were you able to look at that and come to any conclusions or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's sort of a blind spot that we have right now is because we actually haven't had any FDA trials that have used the REDCap to EHR integration. We're starting to dabble a little bit more on that. So for those of you who are involved in the REDCap community, there is an ongoing effort to have software validation for 21 CFR Part 11 for REDCap. That's another thing that I'd be happy to talk more about if you're interested in getting involved. We have a working group with NCATS that's looking at a different implementation guide to get sort of sites that are interested in 21 CFR Part 11 compliance with REDCap, but maybe don't know how to get started. But going back to your question, I think we're still working out those questions internally in terms of what the requirements are, because the source, like as you know, 21 CFR Part 11 covers source documentation, right? And so in this case, the source documentation is the EHR, but we are also pulling it into REDCap. So we need to maintain some sort of link to the EHR data so that we can take advantage of the compliance that the EHR companies have to go through. And so the details of that are still being worked out, but I think the goal is to basically for REDCap to be able in the audit logs to maintain some sort of link to the EHR record so that we can reference those if there was ever an FDA audit for 21 CFR Part 11.
Right. Thank you.
So Alex, I have one more question for you. So we tried really hard in N3C to bring in as many diverse organizations as possible. because obviously we wanted N3C to be representative of nationwide, clinical centers. But obviously it's been very challenging to get some of the sort of what I call the non-fancy pants centers to be participating. And obviously the answer to that is going to be FHIR. On the other hand, the FHIR quality and maturity in those organizations, or in any organization, is still quite limited. I'm wondering what you think about the feasibility of trying to engage several kind of community centers or other kind of smaller, non-traditional academic medical centers, in the process of participating in N3C. And if maybe that might be a good opportunity to work together, because we're really fortunate to have a lot of safety net hospitals through OCHAN, but we're still really lacking the participation from many organizations who I think would like to participate. But that's really the primary vehicle by which we could potentially realize that goal longer term.
Right. Yeah, I think OCHAN is probably the best example, right? They are able to provide the technology and also access sort of to the non-fancy pants like hospitals as well. And so I think that any sort of efforts to reach out would, like, obviously the red cap technology piece is fairly easy. And so there might be in terms of finding in the Venn diagram of people, like places that have red cap set up and also have some semblance of data that's mapped in their EHR to FHIR resources. I think would be the group of people, of institutions to go for at this point. And we don't really have a great sense of who those people are, but I think I think that would be the sort of the best case scenario in terms of organizations that might be best to partner with in these situations. Yeah.
And I agree with Melissa. There's another very, maybe we don't talk about it so much, but there's a disincentive for Epic and Cerner and other big vendors to actually implement bulk FHIR. And they are dragging their feet on this. And so, Melissa, I'm just thinking on the top of my head, maybe it would be a good idea is to look at a small vendor that represents one of those institutions, you know what I mean? Because they may be actually more willing, because they have less market, power to actually be involved in implementing the standards. Because I think that's going to be a challenge, a political challenge. I'm not really sure I have an answer, but that there absolutely have no incentive to comply with this right now, and I think that's going to be hard.
I completely agree with you, Ken, and that's why I was thinking, with Alex's work, if there are some particular sites that are already really engaged in this, maybe that could be a good, partnership model where we're kind of, greasing the wheels of many of these research and care things together, as opposed to sort of just doing it as a one-off, one at a time. So maybe we could come up with a project to do together like that.
Right. Yeah, and not all of the organizations on this list are fancy pants organizations, and so that might be a good place to start with if we can identify a couple. But actually, everything that we've done so far with FHIR and pulling data from Epic and Cerner has not used bulk FHIR at all. We've just done the per patient queries of FHIR, and so even with that, we've found, even from a performance standpoint, that it's very reasonable and to be able to extract large amounts of data into an external system like RedCap.
Nice job, Alex. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for inviting me. It's been fun.
There's a hand up, so I'm gonna let them speak. Just 1 second. I'll promote them. And Juby?
Yes, hi, it's Juby George Weze from Blob Excel. I've been part of the NCATS for a long time with the COVID conclave, but one big suddenly happened is I was part of MITRE's HL7's past year advanced directive program at the same time. So that's where Alex's and NCAT's this converges. And I actually want an EHR. And we're in the middle of doing Da Vinci. Some of the ones, it's parallel to where Alex is in the same space. So there is an opportunity for our EHR. It is small. We deliberately kept it small for reasons of our own. And so it's not Epic, it's not Cerner, and there's not a lot of blockage. That's an option available. Just wanted to say that.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I'd love to sort of hear more about that as well after we get off the call. So I put my email in the chat if you are able to reach out. I'd be happy to discuss further.
Wonderful. I think that's all of the questions. And thank you so much for a great presentation and discussion. Seems like it's a ripe area for collaboration. And we'll see everybody in September.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rachel. Bye.